You're listening to What in the World with Richard Garner on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
What in the World? The name of this show for the last 2 years, obviously sort of taken from the well-known phrase, what in the world? In this case, obviously, it was more about a journey about going down the road of figuring some things out, asking some questions, the fascinating, the unexplained, and the underexplained, as we like to say here. Tonight that journey ends. It will continue, but it won't continue here. Neil Kramer will be our last guide, our last shepherd to take us, well, to wherever he wants to take us tonight. Final episode of What in the World on Sirius XM Canada Talks. Channel 167.
This is What in the World on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
And welcome back to the show. As we said off the top, the journey is ending here on Sirius XM for What in the World. It will continue. Not sure exactly where and when, but it will continue. And, you know, I've had the pleasure of sitting down and having some incredible conversations with, you know, all sorts of incredible thought leaders from, you know, various different disciplines and different sectors, you know, covering a gamut of hopefully interesting subjects, all under the umbrella of exploring the, you know, the fascinating, the unexplained, and the underexplained. And there's a very conscious agenda, if you will, on my part to be able to sort of bring together maybe two worlds that had been compartmentalized in different places, one being quote unquote legitimate or credible or mainstream topics, the other being alternative or whatever label you want to put on, but followed quickly with dismissed or marginalized because they hadn't passed the litmus test of being accepted, let's say, by the majority. The interesting thing to me about that is that is so contradictory when you think about history, is that when you go back and even the people we celebrate, in fact, most of the people we celebrate as world changers, as influencers, as incredibly impactful people who shaped the world we live in now, all of them started as the quote-unquote outsider, on the fringe, alternative, mitigated, marginalized, etc. And, you know, we've had a pattern as a society, as a species to, you know, again, tune those people out, negate them, or worse, often worse, actually, until maybe, I don't know, 50, 100 years later, then we realize, oh, that person was right. We come out with a stamp to honor them. We maybe apologize at an official institutional level for, I don't know, stoning them, killing them, locking them up, whatever it is. We haven't seemed to really improve that much in that particular area because as we sit here in the year 2015, even with this incredible revolution of information, of access to information and knowledge, it still resembles, how things might have been, who knows, 500 years ago. If you come to the table, you might find a bigger audience today, let's say, but you're still having to, fight your way upstream and crack through this glass ceiling of quote unquote accepted mainstream knowledge. And that's too bad, because you would think we would have learned some lessons by now to have said, you know what? Oh, wait a sec. That person we just said, get out of here, that they're crazy. We didn't you remember those 500 other people that happened to, the people we read about. You know what? This time, let's listen to this person. But I don't know. Will that improve going forward? You hope. But the people who are still out there occupying the role of the disruptors, let's say, which is a term really from the world of business when you're talking about a disruptive innovation. And the disruptive innovators who are out there bringing the very, very necessary and important different perspectives, lucidity, emotional intelligence, open-mindedness, objectivity to the world that's already out there kind of lost. Those people are thankfully able to, like I said, find an audience today and actually influence people in the present, not just maybe in 50 years from now. One of the people I've said, countless times, because I've had him on the show here as well as with the One Network, that's going to be joining us for our last show is somebody that's, been doing yeoman's work in that regard and is reminiscent for me anyways of somebody that's, maybe a little more in line with your old school Greek philosophers, like people that were really asking big questions and not just, dog on a bone, on a specific issue and just becoming obsessed with, trying to be right. It's the other part of that, which is the question that is as important as ultimately thinking you have the answer. And that, of course, is Neil Kramer, who, essentially, according to his bio, is a philosopher and an esotericist, which, I couldn't be more jacked up about because, again, to me, a lot of the answers about where we think we're going lie in the esoteric answers of where we've come from. And if you're an avid listener to the show, Neil's work. We'll talk about where you can find more of his work, but let's catch up and check in with Neil Kramer. Neil, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you doing?
I'm good. And, I know we talked a little bit before the show about sort of a state of the union as being a final curtain call for what in the world. And I couldn't have thought of anybody I'd rather have on this show to be able to, bring some focus, some clarity and also ask some questions about, where we find ourselves here in 2015 going into, I guess, the final quarter of this particular year. How are you feeling these days, I guess, about yourself and ultimately where we find ourselves in relation to each other and everything else?
State of the Union, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for what you've just said. That's very kind. Well, let's try and do a fabulous last show. Mm-hmm. First and foremost, I would say that we are in an incredibly fascinating period of human history. Something to me new is happening that we haven't seen here for many, many a long moon, many millennia, which is this: the old systems of control, the sort of chain of command, the ancient imperial dogma that has shaped human society for thousands of years is beginning to fall apart. I mean, they're trying to cast it in Europe and the Middle East and Asia as some sort of socio-political upheaval, cultural change, war, disputes, reform, and all that. Rubbish. What it is the global disintegration of false authority. Not authority in total, because some of that can be useful. False authority. People don't buy it anymore. So the politics in America and Britain, the two places I know best, is so poor and so transparently pathetic that sensible people from all walks of life, whatever they are, plumbers and lawyers and doctors and truck drivers, whatever, everyone is realizing that the government is not our friend. It does not represent us. The game is up. So it's like the secret of the card trick that they've been playing on people for a long time has finally been detected. And it's been detected, that method, that trick, by a sufficient number of people that it now can't be ignored. So the old order is failing. And, you can take different views on why this might be. Some people think that there's been a sort of global awakening and more people are now refusing to be suppressed by the egregious, conquest of what I call empire, which is just, this giant system of control. And they think that we've reached a threshold of awareness that undermines the sort of violent mental conditioning that has tricked our fathers and forefathers into submission for thousands of years. There's some truth to that. My view, however, is a bit different to that. So in answer to your question, this is my answer. I feel that a long time ago, we asked empire here to play the role of an adversary in order for us to snap out of our renunciation of our own creational nature. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. We forgot that we're responsible for the status and nature of this world. And a long time ago, we began to drift into a sort of terminal entropy where the whole thing starts to disintegrate. So to prevent that very unfortunate thing from happening, we requested that a shadow adversary visit us to demonstrate what happens when we disavow our gift of life. And I would say that the jeopardy that has resulted from this big holographic Shakespearean drama that we've all been participating in here for a long time has now served its purpose. We don't need empire anymore now, thank you, bye-bye, off you go. And empire says, yeah, fine, about time, no hard feelings, you asked for it, remember, see ya. So now there's a massive cleanup necessary. So many unconscious actions, so many gravely unaware agreements and systems have been put into place that it would take thousands of years to clean up all the refuse that we've accumulated. So here's the interesting bit, here's the esoteric bit. A very interesting dynamic comes into play, which we've seen before. The earth cleanses itself like a giant rose bush. It prunes itself in preparation for new growth, for a new season. And a lot of distorted, unhealthy, dead wood will be cut away. Completely natural earth changes. They do away with what is untrue. And lots of people will go into the sort of celestial recycling bin and they'll get made anew somewhere else as someone else at some point, maybe. And it's all right because everybody's indestructible and bulletproof, really. We're just these virtual reality video game avatars, quite impervious to the struggles and rigors of this place, really. And so as that drama unfolds, which we're seeing now on our newspapers and televisions and internet, it looks very striking and, as I say, very theatrical. And lots of heavily conditioned people who chose not to ask why are things the way they are, lots of those people will go. And some people who are just tired and have had enough will also choose to go. And then we'll be left with something unique and novel and placed beautifully for a new evolutionary step in our very colourful history. And I think that's very exciting and very natural and inevitable to me. So there's some apocalypse in the true sense of the word, a revealing of something truthful. That's all that is. There's a wonderful, beautiful apocalypse upon us, and we have to take responsibility for ourselves. And only a very small number of people are choosing to do that, which is totally fine because there's too many people here anyway. So that suits me down to the ground.
Well, it's going to be, I think, a long time before we'll find lovely and beautiful an apocalypse in the same sentence, but I understand it. And again, the Greek term apocalypse actually does mean what you were saying, change.
The rending of the veil. Yeah.
Bingo. So it's not, I mean, it's gotten completely associated with, this terrible destructive thing, but it's in fact
cataclysm.
Exactly. But that's
in the
sorry.
end, I just, sorry if I can interrupt you just for a second. I see zero chance of back engineering the sort of stupendous disasters of Capitol Hill and Whitehall and Brussels and the Pentagon and Google and Facebook. Even high schools and college, hopelessly inadequate trade and commerce systems, and commerce being the underpinning of society, all that has to go, doesn't it? You can't back engineer that. Never mind the religions and the political philosophies and that. It takes too long to heal and reconstruct and recalibrate. So guess what? The planet, the Earth, the world, the Earth plane says, don't worry about it, because every now and again, every few thousand years, 3, 4, 5, 6, not long, I reboot myself, and anything that was built on untruth gets erased. What was built on truth goes on. So how we have grown, our truthful expression of ourselves, is sort of patterned in a certain number of people and into the very soil and sky itself. And then the natural environment holds our truth. And then on we go with a new age of the earth, the fourth or the fifth age this will be now, depending on how you calculate it. And the first time I went to Avebury Stone Circle in Wiltshire, which is this like, Stonehenge type thing, I became aware that our ancestors on the British Isles had left us information about how this thing keeps going. It says, yeah, get ready for this, guys, because not far away, you're going to have another one. So don't get despondent about how stupid things get, because it's all part of the theatre. And once you've learned sufficiently, it'll go away, and you won't need to do that ever again. And we're on the cusp of that change now, which to me is very, very interesting.
Yeah, and and arguably again in the wrong circles, that could be misinterpreted. But I would agree that I'll just speak for myself. I mean, I have an anticipatory feeling about that's actually positive, not negative. So I think we're on the same wavelength.
Yeah, it's like a forest fire. It gives new life to the forest. If you're a little sparrow sat on a branch, it's kind of scary.
Yeah.
Right? But if you're one of the old trees, some of those old trees in the deep forest right here, and where you live, especially around where you live, they've seen forest fires come and go and like, oh, don't worry about it. It looks pretty scary. Lots of things disappear, but actually, in the long run, it's essential for the health of the forest.
In grand scheme of things, funny, some friends of mine launched an organic drink brand recently called Akuma, which is the Inuit word for that forest fire that you're describing.
Really? That's interesting.
It's
what a lovely word. I'll make a note.
Yeah,
How
and
do you
it's
spell that?
Ikkuma, and it's again an Inuit word about exactly that, the death, the rebirth, etc. We're going to continue on the other side of the break down this very interesting direction that we've opened up with Neil around this particular State of the Union, because this is, let's talk about it then. I mean, if that's where we're at, let's talk about it, and let's not shy away from what this means. More with Neil Kramer on the other side of the break. It is What in the World, Sirius XM Canada Talks, channel 167.
Poor people gonna rise up, get their share.
Here's Richard Garner with What in the World on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome back. We are with Neil Kramer, philosopher, esotericist, and all-around big thinker, let's say. And before the break, I think you touched on, let's say some holographic universe theory, or some matrix, if you will, because there is the illusion on your side that we are the creators and the creator-ish, right? I mean, this is my interpretation, that we have kind of chosen this to be here, that we're in some sort of illusory mechanism, game, if you will. I don't know exactly what it is or how it is, or I don't suspect there's somebody on a cloud with a beard running the show. I think it's infinitely more abstract and beyond our capabilities in this vibrational field to even contemplate, probably. But it's certainly, I certainly agree with you that whatever this is, and it's really interesting to me that people like Sylvester Gates, who is not just one of the premier mathematicians on the planet, science advisor to Barack Obama, who came out on a panel with Neil deGrasse Tyson, amongst others, in terms of mainstream scientists, a few years ago, and talked about his work investigating the quote-unquote birth of the universe, if you will. The way mathematicians can do this stuff through numbers, that's clearly beyond me. But essentially his takeaway from a deep, deep dive into what kind of makes up the universe. And again, even as he was saying this on this stage, he was reluctant because he knew how it sounded and he knew what the reaction would be from the mainstream scientific crowd that was there. But he said his conclusions, his findings from doing this deep dive were ones and zeros. That's his words, not mine. And as he said this on this panel of, completely slack-jawed scientists, where they were like, what do you mean ones and zeros? Like, are you is that an analogy? He goes, no, I mean literally programming language ones and zeros. My, again, my deep dive mathematically into the sort of origin or the existence of the universe is ones and zeros, binary code. And of course somebody says, well, what are you applying? Implying there's somebody that we're in a program, somebody wrote this. He said, listen, I'm not implying anything. I think of course the Matrix came up in this conversation, but again, this wasn't somebody who was looking for that answer. That's the answer they extracted from it. I don't know. Obviously, I don't know what the source of that is because it's beyond my comprehension. But he's not the only person, let's say, in that mainstream world. In fact, there's quite many now that are looking at this idea of a quote-unquote holographic universe. That there's this possibility, and this stuff is now on CNN level stuff, BBC stuff. You see it occasionally pop up and then disappear. It doesn't get, tons of discourse because it's too much to digest in a soundbite world. But it is actually being contemplated. And again, I don't know what the source of that would be, where that would start, where that would begin, how we would have participated in that. I'm a believer that we are. Again, to your point earlier, we're kind of here through choosing in some way, shape, or form. I don't know.
For sure.
But is this close without, and I don't know if you're a believer in the divine, so to speak. You talk a lot about spirituality.
Yes,
I don't know
I absolutely am,
how that's framed, but is this kind of, are we getting warm here in terms of this as possibly the parameters of this little game we're in?
Well, how could I know, Richard? How the hell could I know? Well, let me tell you what I feel, right? Let me tell you what I feel.
Yeah.
This is what I feel. I feel that if we knew how intimately our consciousness was influencing the physical structure of this world, you'd be amazed. You'd be shocked to death almost. You'd be astonished. So a lot of New Agers talk about co-creation and stuff. It's more profound than that. I think our mind is just like this enormous language that is responsible for the construction of this place. And it can be super excellent or super ridiculous. And the main thing that controls that is your view of your own individuality. If you consider yourself important and impotent, that's two hugely different things. If you think that you're substantial or immaterial, those are two hugely different things that affect how you actually are. There was this European mystic from way back, and he used to say, if you don't know you're a king, then you are not a king. And it's a very coded phrase, that, which is indicating that your power is in your sovereignty. That if you, let's use some old-fashioned language for a minute. God gave you his divine creational power and said, you go and run with that and do whatever you want with it, and I'll check back with you in a few million years. You go for it, boy. Do whatever you want. Try and make it cool and excellent and harmonious. Use it to observe and see. Use it to recalibrate and change and unmake. Use it to destroy when things are rubbish. Destroy them. And when things are excellent, refine them and cultivate them. And you go for it and come back later and tell me how it was. Because God can't see everything, because omnipotence is a very funny thing and omniscience is a very funny thing. You can't see what is all of you. You can't see anything because you are everything. So God did a very clever thing. He created something that wasn't him. a giant empty canvas and said, right, I'm going to create little tiny independent pieces of me, send them into that giant empty canvas and see what happens. See what happens. And they are identical to me. They look small and they look different because they're separated and isolated from me, but they are me. They are identical to me. Man is made in the form of God, and it says that in the King James for good reason. He is. We'd say today, not man, we'd say humans. Doesn't matter, it's just the old language, it's not gender specific. Man is made in the image of God. He is. And our creational ability is so staggering that all that empire has had to do to create a world of turmoil is persuade us that we're not creating anything. And when you don't think that, you create what you're told to create. So part of the collapse of empire is that a sufficient number of men and women have now realized that we create this. It's not a world we came into. It's not even a world we grew out of. It's a world we made. And we're making it every second that we're alive. And it's astonishing. And some brave maverick scientists are saying that and have been saying that for about 200 years. And some brave, astonishing mystics have been saying it for about 25,000 years. Same thing. And it's absolutely true. And it completely undermines government, authority, aristocracy, Abrahamic religions. All of it goes because there's no savior. There's no figures of redemption. There's nothing like that. We're it. We are the children of God in that way of thinking about it, which is incredibly wonderful, absolutely brilliant. And if you don't like God, say divine. If you don't like divine, say source, universe, galaxy. I don't care. But our hand in this creation is super significant. And with every passing year in my growth and in my learning and study and understanding of the old ways, particularly in Hermetic mysticism, that becomes truer every year. And all you've got to do to take it offline is persuade people that they're nothing. And there's many clever ways that they do that. And as soon as someone thinks they're nothing, they stop creating. It's zero creation. All you do is you're like a factory worker building cars at Ford, in the plant. You just put that nut there, put that wheel there, put that chassis in there, and just keep making what the hell you're told to make. You're not creating anything. You're carrying out orders. And that's what's changing now. So all over Europe and America and Asia and Africa and Australia, people are going, hang on a second, I'm not doing that anymore. And that is very exciting. That's not happened for a very, very, very long time. And I think this is the last time we'll have to do empire ever again. I think it's over.
Well, I hope you're right. I mean, it definitely feels like we're kind of holding it together. There's a movie coming out next week called The Walk, I believe, with Gordon Levitt. It's about the guy that walked across the Twin Towers, tightrope walker in the 70s. It's irrelevant to this conversation, except that I was invited to, this like a screening, and part of the experience for the press and whatever was a virtual reality thing. Now, I knew, I'm deathly afraid of heights. And that's, it's like, who isn't, right? I mean, to say you're afraid of heights is like to say,
it's a natural impulse.
So it's probably just to what varying degree. And I guess it's quite severe for me. But I was still wanting to go and see and experience what this would be like. And so you go. So again, they're recreating virtually the experience of being atop the Twin Towers and staring at a tightrope going across and walking across it, man. So I was like, okay, well, this can't be that, whatever, compelling, whatever. Well, Neil, I'm telling you, man, I couldn't move. Wow, and the guy said, listen, he says, this is pretty common. A lot of people don't take, he said, I have had people break down in tears and not be able to forget about take a step. They repel. And so I couldn't even take a step. It was just overwhelming. And then I took it off and I, went over and I was talking to the publicists. We're all having a laugh. But the thing that was killing me is that I knew this right here in front of me
Is not real.
And I knew this was the ultimate analogy of this whole thing that we're living in and talking about right now. And that if I couldn't, even though
it's exactly the same, Richard.
That's
exactly
and I'm standing there, Neil.
Powerful
like
observation.
I'm standing. I know I'm standing on real ground, even with the power that I knew my feet were on the ground. That there was no possibility of me actually, dying, let alone hurting myself. It was still that convincing. My senses are that hardwired to what they see in interpretation that even my conscious knowing wasn't enough to overpower that. And all it made me think of was this matrix we're in that we know isn't real, but we give it its power through our senses and believing in it. And I ended up going back and saying, screw that, I'm doing this. And I went out and I walked, and it was only for this reason that we're talking about. And I'm telling you, I was scared out of my wits, but I knew that this was an important step to take, no pun intended. But man, it was a really powerful, striking example to me of what we're dealing with inside this matrix.
It's exactly the same. And here's the thing, if you gathered with your tribespeople every month, men of great power and discipline, that would never have happened, because the comradeship and the power and discipline that you would be emanating through your tribe every single week, every single day, you'd remember, say, is this real? This is not real. And you'd be walking ahead before you'd even caught up with yourself. The only thing that makes us have trepidation is forgetfulness. Another trick of empire, forgetfulness. We have a sort of spiritual power amnesia, and we forget that we make this. Just like some programmer guy made that virtual reality space. We make this just the same. And if you were having constant fellowship with super quality, strong men and women, you would never forget that. But we go off on our narratives and in our journeys and through the city and doing this and doing that and paying your insurance and sending your emails and whatever, you forget. You keep forgetting, and you rely on the crude and fabulous senses, of course. I mean, what instruments, what fantastic things. The crudeness comes in when we use those as the primary means of encounter. They're not that at all. They're just saying, well, here's one way of doing it, but it's not the way. And so what your senses are telling you is enormously misleading. And obviously we've got plenty of our friends in Europe and Asia who've been drumming that into our heads for about 5,000 years, saying, hello, it's called Maya. We know all about it. Correct. It's Maya. It's rubbish. It's illusion. It's a beautiful entrancement. It's nonsense, though. And virtual reality, it's funny, Richard, I did a talk in New York last month at the Omega Institute, and I talked about virtual worlds, what they teach us about this world. I did a whole piece on that. And the closer it gets to the mainstream, and I believe next year PlayStation are releasing virtual reality headsets en masse for the first time.
Wow.
People are going to realize how this is not any different to that. It's of a different order, and it's of a different, let's say, resolution and fidelity. But the nature of it is the same. So your binary nature is the same. And even in my old, mystical heritage of Hermeticism, the sort of third and is it the fifth? I can't remember. The third principle, vibration. Everything is vibrating. Nothing is at rest. And that creates rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything's pulsing all the time. So the naught and the one is just an interpretation of that. But this world, the pulse of this world is a thought of God. It's God pinging in. Like your modem pings, your Wi-Fi signal, your cell phone. It pings to get the signal, right? To check everything's okay. That's a divine ping, those noughts and ones. It's not the nature of it, but it shows the origin of it. So this world is a thought. The world is a thought. And one way of describing that is like a kind of hologram. That's a nice way of describing it. But to me, it's more properly considered as a thought, a big thought, very consistent, very deep and profound, very sophisticated, very sustaining, but it's a thought and nothing else.
Wow. The power of that. We're going to take a break here. I want to continue down the direction of the senses, especially as it relates to esoteric mysticism and what people have talked about in the past about the other senses that we have access to, but we have forgotten about. And perhaps that's the key to unlocking this mystery. More with Neil Kramer on the other side of the break. It is What in the World, Sirius XM, Canada Talks, channel 167.
Early for the daily races, going nowhere.
Welcome back to What in the World with Richard Garner on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome back to the second to last segment here with Neil Kramer, and man, do I feel we're getting somewhere here. Unfortunately, the limitations of this particular show might prevent us from getting all the way there, but because I don't think we're dancing around an area that has been touched upon from different places at different times. The quick summary being that there is a sort of a game going on here, an experiment, something that we're co-creating, that we're actually part of. It's not the first one, Hopis, Maya, different ancient civilizations call it the fifth world or the sixth world or whatever it is. And the idea of consciousness creating, the idea that the senses are holding this illusion together, this virtual reality, these are all things that I think, we could probably put into a thesis, let's say, if we were forced to. But the key, it seems, or the elusive part of this story of perhaps unlocking the great mystery lies in these senses, I guess, because when we talk senses, obviously we're talking about the five senses. And when we talk about, senses beyond that, we've got words like ESP, which are, again, marginalized, dismissed, extrasensory perception. Of course, we have sixth sense talk, etc. But from what I've heard, and certainly this is an area that you've spent a hell of a lot more time looking into and understanding, but different cultures from as far back as like you said, 5,000-10,000 years ago, have talked about having, I don't know, I've heard everything from 100 senses to, beyond that these things like intuition, telepathy, all these other things that were somehow either shut off deliberately or not, or just shut off because they're latent, because they were forgotten. Whatever it is, in terms of understanding the rest of this mystery, this illusion, this matrix, if you will, seems to lie in figuring out how to turn those senses back on. Is that something? Again, am I getting warm here in terms of what we're all trying to do if we're doing a practice and we're trying to sort of awaken the divinity within us?
Sounds like a good way forward to me. Here's what I would say, right? The major obstacle to seeing the nature of a thing, whether it's a tree or a person or a government or a planet or anything, a sun, a star, big things, little things, the major obstacle to seeing truthfully is the notion of separation, right? If you think you're separate from something, you can't see it. So here's a nice example, right? This is a funny one, but it serves a purpose. If you make love properly with somebody, then there's a moment where the boundaries merge, and just for a bit, the identities merge and blur, and it's not clearly, we'll call them Peter and Jane. It's not just Peter and Jane. It's something else. And there's a merging. When you love somebody, even from a great distance, 10,000 miles away, when you love somebody very deeply, you're actually merging with them a little bit. In many systems of mysticism, when they teach, we'll speak about some of the things you said, levitation, for example, but more so telekinesis, which I've had classes in, which were very, very productive and excellent. If you go for a telekinesis class in a certain discipline, from a certain school of mysticism. Mysticism just being people who want to know the nature of things and who live with a great degree of time dedicated to that. That's all a mystic is. It's nothing super special. It's just somebody doing that stuff. From one school, this is what they'll say. Okay, here's how you change. Here's how you bend the spoon. You become the spoon. It's not like the Matrix where there is no spoon. That's true as well, but you become it, right? And you bend yourself. If you want to levitate the pen up off your desk, you realize that the pen is in no way distinct from you. No way whatsoever, because your thought is creating every single atomic piece of what's around you. So you have to change the thought as a whole. And when we can't get our heads around that, you can't change anything, and you fall into the idea that there's this little guy called Richard in your head somewhere, and that's you. And you're looking out at this big thing called the world, and it's like a piece of scenery. It's the backdrop. In actual fact, the way that we're enmeshed and embedded into this is so deep. It's like a fish in the ocean, you know, the water, the coral, the bubbles, all the different aspects, the massive marine biology of that environment, which is super rich, especially on the Pacific where I am here. That is one giant organism, one giant ecosystem. It's like a psychic biome, biome, a psychic biome that creates an environment where the fish realizes that it's part of a big thing. It has a much more transcendental experience than we ever do. So if you start to think in that way, part of the telekinesis or psychokinesis, as sometimes it's called today, part of that class, they say, before we do any exercises and stuff and try and move things, number one, if you feel separate from that, you won't be doing anything. You won't be levitating or moving or pulling or pushing. By the way, levitating is super, super hard. Pushing and pulling is easy. If you want to try that at home, folks, don't levitate, push and pull. That's easy. But the key to it, Richard, which speaks to your question, the key to it is if you consider yourself in any way distinct from that object, then you can't do it. You have to understand that there's no you here and there's no object. And as soon as you start to do that, you realize that the whole thought form is under your control, just like it is in a dream. So why can we fly in dreams? Why do we have telekinesis easy in dreams? Because we know in the dream that we're under control of the entire environment. So it's easy. You can do anything. Here, we don't believe it. And we've been conditioned since the time we came out of the womb to say, you're separate. You're a little guy in a little car in a little apartment somewhere doing stuff. And the measure of your life is the quality of your shelter, your garments, your food, and your transport. That's it. Good luck, baby. That's it. End of story. You're separate. So that sense of separation and insubstantial nature, quite distinct from what's happening at the center of the universe or whatever, that disempowers the human to the extent where they don't know they're a king anymore. They don't know they're a queen anymore. They lose the power. So there's nothing that isn't just a thought away. It's right there at your fingertips. It doesn't take years of practice. It's right there. It's not like learning the piano. This is right there, a moment away. But that thought changes everything. When you realize that the tree, the room, the curtain, the blinds, the chair, the desk, the computer, everything is part of you, it shifts who you are. And it's a fundamental change that changes how you live, how you work, what you want to do, what you don't want to do, who you're with, who you're not with. It's a super profound shift. And although it has, of course, connections to oneness and non-duality and all this kind of stuff, the actual living experience of it is a real piece of craftsmanship that takes a little bit of time to get it integrated. Doing it is easy. But if you suddenly levitate your chair like C-3PO in Return of the Jedi and you lift yourself up in the middle of the room, you won't be able to go to work tomorrow because there won't be any point. Your whole world is turned upside down. Everything's different. So it only allows us to introduce that to the level that we're able to. So there's like a safety mechanism to that.
Where are you on whatever, psychedelics or whatever you want to, like because the experience you described earlier, I've done ayahuasca a couple of times. The experience you talked about I like one of the main takeaways from one of the experiences was this absolute, not a thought, not a feeling, the absolute knowing that I was not, quote unquote, Richard Garner.
Right, absolutely. Richard Garner's an art project that you're involved in.
And I was looking at Richard Garner, Neil. Like I was so separate from Richard Garner, and the realization so profound. It was like, oh my God, I am not Richard Garner. There was no I am. I'm just the whole. I'm whatever. And I was looking, but at the same time, I had a profound love for this Richard Garner experience that I had clearly chosen, and I reemerged with Richard Garner throughout that, whatever that 5-6 hour experience was. But again, it was irrefutable. Even as I sit here today, having a harder time, without the quote unquote medicine, but because at the end of the day, we could sit here and talk all day about this. The illusion of separation and the illusion of separateness, but to master that, or to feel that, genuinely, I got to believe, you touched on a little bit, but this has to take a real dedicated, disciplined practice.
It does. The ability to do it is easy, but you can't. It's very complicated because you can't see it, because it comes into this strange thing of dimensional awareness, that it's happening in a very small, imaginal, subjective dimensional space, i.e. it happens for you but no one else. If you did it in a room as a beginner, no one else can see it. You can. You think you've done it and everyone else is going, what are they talking about? Nothing's changed. To make it a consensus act in the consensus reality convergence, i.e. the real world, the physical world of cause and effect, apparently, takes an extraordinary discipline. It does. And in the end, it's sort of not worth it, because we're not here to do that. You might as well just pick the bloody thing up and move it with your hands, right? There's no real point, but it's a magical, inspirational exercise to demonstrate to certain people, just to prove to them the nature of what's going on. Plant medicine, psychedelics, entheogens, whatever you want to call it, can be very useful for that, but only for certain people at certain times in certain environments. I'll tell you what, this is an unpopular view. 7 out of 10 times, it's a disaster, and it actually creates all kinds of problems. Now, I know you a little bit, and I can see how it would be not at all that for you. It would be beneficial, an eye-opener, a gift, an aspirational gift, because you've done quite a lot of work and you know how to look after yourself. You're a decent householder, a good man. You've got yourself in reasonable shape and order. You know what you're doing. You know who you are. You have a sense of things. That's really important. A lot of people are going over to Iquitos and Peru and doing all sorts of things, and it's just totally messing the wiring up, and no one's in any position to do everything. So they take the lid off, but no one knows how to put it back on again. So I would caution people, just as a, my own personal view, that it's medicine. And if you don't know why you're taking it, and you don't know your status of your own self, you don't go anywhere near it. There's no point. There's plenty of time for that in the future. Come to it later, but don't. So it's very profound and very powerful, and it's an amplifier. And if you've got problems, it'll just amplify them.
Yeah. And
if you've got something that's in process as a healing or a resolution, it'll amplify that. Fantastic. That's what people are looking for, of course. But some people, it's killing them, really, psychically. It's just shutting them down, and it just amplifies untruth, and it amplifies truth. So you need to be in a pretty good space to even go there. So yeah, having an unwise facilitator is also a problem. So if you've not got the right guys around you to deal with the critical thing that is what happens the next day when you're not having it, when you're trying to integrate and understand, that's the most important day, is the day afterwards. And if you've got super men and women around you, wise people, good news. If you've not, they're like, well, anyway, thanks very much for that, and you're back on the canoe, right?
Helpful words of advice there. We're going to take our final break. We're going to talk about what Neil's up to, specifically Knowing the Mystery with Neil Kramer. What in the World? Sirius XM, Channel 167, Canada Talks.
listening to What in the World with Richard Garner on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
And welcome back, Neil. We're a little up against it. Give us just a brief thumbnail sketch of Knowing the Mystery.
Knowing the Mystery is a recording of a wonderful event that it was my pleasure to take part in New York at the Omega Institute last month. So it's a 7-hour audio recording of this weekend where we looked at mysticism, philosophy, metaphysics, growth, development, psychic awareness, lots of fabulous fun things. So if people go to neilkramer.com, you can click on that, Knowing the Mystery, a nice big black and yellow banner it is with an eagle on it. You can't miss it. Knowing the Mystery. Check that out. Download it. $20. Price of a pizza. Good value.
and I hear I'm jealous right now because I'm thinking I'd like 6 more hours to continue our conversation. We don't have it. So if you got titillated a little with the tip of the iceberg that we've touched, the surface we've scratched tonight, obviously Knowing the Mystery is where you want to go next, because that will be, you got the pilot episode tonight. You can get the whole series if you go to neilkramer.com. We got about a minute left, not enough time to give a proper goodbye, and not to say it's a goodbye, because obviously we'll be talking again, Neil, but I just want to say thanks for coming on the show and just really delivering something that's so powerful and so uplifting and elevating, not only for me, but certainly for the people listening. Continued great work. And I look forward to crossing paths again and seeing where you're at on your own evolutionary path.
You bet. Well, let's continue the conversation elsewhere as your adventure continues. Yeah, I'd love to.
Beautiful. Thanks a lot. That's Neil Kramer. neilkramer.com. Thanks to everybody that's listened to the show. We've loved doing it. And again, we'll find you again. You can check me out on Facebook, Richard Garner. Find me there. And we'll be continuing this adventure sometime in the near future. And when we do, we'll see you when we see you. Thanks a lot.